further earthen fragmentation. My pieces, small, smaller, smaller yet. That falling apart and pretending to hold life in my broken clay body is what I know best. That prayers are not enough. That life is leaking through these cracks. That I will be left dry for good. Part 2. To heal, it starts after having sunk in a barrel of denial, sunk so deep it triggered a transitory and perfect dream state. My voice, steadily, softly, advising. To mend is a verb. The breaking is easy, you see, quick, fleeting. The mending is laborious, counterintuitive, a perpetual process. You see, a vessel once fractured will never again be seamless. You see, ghost pain will linger along each puckered crack, pinching your conviction until it's bruised with blue doubt. You see, clay stretches and shrinks to the rhythm of each breath. To mend, you see before your pieces no longer fit as one. A lick of lacquer, a puff of powdered gold, and compassionately hold yourself together. Hold faithfully, hold deliberately, hold mindfully. Adhesion. Breathe as one. You see, it's true that a vessel once fractured will never again be seamless, but fractures can be transformed into rivers of gold. Kintsugi, by accentuating that which holds history, illuminating fragmented beauty. Hold on to life, breathe as one. This next poem is titled I Love Hungry, and it's after Jessica Salgado's Fat Girl Wants Love. I am in envy of my dog, his ability to lick his lips unabashedly, the audaciousness of his ravenous gaze to claim all that he wants. And I, too, want. As a fat girl, every expression of hunger is met with a reminder of la dieta, no comas más, how it teaches you that expressing hunger is unattractive when you're a fat girl. How it colors every sensation that originates in the pit of your stomach with shame. How I used to think that my stomach was actually my heart, and every feeling was the same Pantone shame 032C hue. How I, too, love hungry. And when as a fat girl I was told to stifle my stomach's cravings, I took that to mean that I should also starve my heart's infatuations. How I also learned that decorating a journal with hearts and the names of your crushes isn't cute when you're a fat girl. How my feelings were always bigger than my big brown body. So when I feel, my hands instinctively meet across my stomach, a delusive attempt to contain my bursting gut. I am in inhibition, how I grind my teeth to keep from salivating, how I thought I perfected hiding my hunger, how my pockets were full, so I ate my letters, so I failed to swallow, so I almost choked on my hunger, how I've almost choked too many times, how my body is rejecting the scarcity, how resistance lies in the unapologetic wanting of that which will nourish and satisfy. This next poem is titled Okay Cupid, and I'm sure as you can guess, this was inspired by my very short time on Okay Cupid, and it is after Sanayi. And I highly encourage you to check out her collection of poetry. So I set up an Okay Cupid account. I didn't expect I'd be asked to state my body type. I should have known. It always comes down to size. The options were thin, overweight, average build, fit, jacked, a little extra, curvy, and full-figured. Oh, and dash, dash, dash was an option too, though prospective matches may think I have something to hide. I'll admit to overthinking my answer. How could I not? I initially thought my only viable options were overweight, curvy, and full-figured. I can't get away with a little extra, nor can I get away with curvy for that matter. None of my curves are in the, between quotes, right places. I should have probably been up front and selected overweight. I feared it could be perceived as a warning. Proceed with caution. Fat person in search of validation. I went with full figured. It seemed the most inviting of the conceivable too. Now I'm going to read a series of small poems or short poems, all under the title Mirror Talk. And I'll explain more about these poems, but I will be reading them alongside a different set of photographs, you know, different from the ones that I originally presented them with. So, but I will speak more to that later. Do you feel warmth in the discordant affirmations that fog your reflection? How should I fill their hollowness? Labored repetition, pattern size. How long? How long to smooth out each fold, the fibers in my body memorized? These past 26 years, as I learned to make myself small enough to hold. How long to soothe the residual ache of each memory? What if I meticulously adorn every blessed inch with a collection of searing, buzzing moonlight kisses to illuminate you from within? Will you feel like home then? When it's just us, I can hear the rattle of shattered spirit and calloused neglect. I feel winded by the challenge of looking at you and learning to see you for you and not the heaviness that your uncensored gaze holds. So I just had to throw in a cat. I mean, a picture of my favorite cat, and you know, Maxie is my soulmate, and yeah, just a little sigh of relief. And I invite everybody as we're taking in this beautiful cat and my face to just take a deep breath. And I'm about to end the screen sharing so that I can share my talk and my thoughts on this body of work. Thank you. Yes, my cat, or my sister's cat, is very cute. Okay, so before I begin to talk about this work, I just want to take a moment to thank you all for holding space for this work to flourish. It's been in progress for a couple years now, and so I thank every person who's lent their energy to this work. In the span of my relatively short visual art career, there's been a significant shift in the content of my artwork. There was a time before Mirror Talk, during which my work centered my mom's experience crossing the US-Mexico border and my experience internalizing the borders that she crossed. For the first time in my life, I began to openly talk about life in a mixed status family. This work was made necessary during the 2016 elections, I'm sure many of you remember, because of the bigotry spewing from the mouth of a talking Cheeto. And my art practice provided the space I needed to process and to talk about decades of trauma caused by this country's xenophobic immigration policies. I mentioned this time before Mirror Talk to set the context. I know that we're all here to talk about the self-portraits and the poems I just shared, but I think it's important to outline, where I started so that you all can understand where I am now. So technically speaking, I started working on Mirror Talk sometime around February of 2019. However, the work truly started the summer of 2018. That was the summer that I woke up to the fact that in the span of my 25 years, since I was 25 at the time, my own internalized fat phobia had become my greatest enemy. That summer, I was just beginning to understand the what seems infinite number of ways that fat phobia had taken over my sense of self. And the loss of one's sense of self is the greatest loss that most of us will experience in our lifetime. And that's something that I've come to learn since. That summer, I realized how self-loathing had gotten in the way of the open and vulnerable relationships that I wanted, both platonic and non-platonic. But most importantly, I realized how self-loathing had kept me from developing a vulnerable and intimate relationship with myself. In the time since that summer, I've learned that the first step towards healing is developing a deep understanding of that which needs to heal. So before I continue, please give me a minute to get into the neurobiological aspects of trauma. For those of you who don't already know this about me, I am in the process of completing a trauma competency certification program, and I can't shut up about it. So I'm gonna just go ahead and say this anyways. So when humans experience trauma and we are triggered into survival mode, the parts of our brain that are hardwired to ensure our survival take over, meaning that the parts of the brain that focus on reasoning, critical thinking, and language are temporarily put on sleep mode. When we are in survival mode, we lose our ability to make sense of our experiences linguistically. For this reason, the trauma that we experience, oftentimes, we can only process through line, color, movement, music, etc. Art in all its forms is a perfect vehicle to process trauma. And let's get this straight. Fat phobia is a system of oppression and a source of chronic trauma for a lot of people, myself included. I should also add that none of us are immune from the disease that is fat phobia, and that this is a call for us to all look inward and learn the ways that we all perpetuate it. This all being said, at some point during that period of awakening, I noticed that I had a terrible relationship to cameras, camera lenses, people holding cameras, photographs, you get it. Being photographed had been a great source of anxiety for most of my life. Allow me to speak unfiltered and say that I absolutely hated being shown pictures of myself because I hated the way what I saw. I hated the way I looked. When I learned this about myself, I had already committed to working on my shit. And at the time, I was working at Moore College of Art and Design on the Parkway and had access to a lot of good quality photo equipment. So I did the logical thing, or what I thought was a logical thing at the time, and one of the most high-risk things I could do, which was to shoot self-portraits. Since I'm not one to make things easy on myself, I kicked off my career as a self-portrait art photographer by experimenting with long exposure photography. This style of photography demands that the model hold their pose for long periods of time in order to capture a crisp image, since the shutter is open for up to 2 or 3 seconds at a time. Similarly, this style of photography gave me the opportunity to capture movement, as well as the tension between stillness and movement. In this process, I challenged myself to confront my reflection by looking directly at the camera lens, in either complete stillness or while incorporating sudden movements to capture the discomfort I experienced while wearing corsets and body shapers as a teenager. I should also add that for almost all, if not all, of my self-portraits, I've also chosen not to smile because I realized at some point that I used smiling as like a defense mechanism. And so I realized if I was going to take this plunge, like I was going to go for it. And so while 2 or 3 seconds doesn't sound like a long time, a second felt like a quarantine long week when I first started this project. Through my self-portrait practice, I created a space to reconstruct my relationship to being photographed and to reconstruct my relationship with myself. Each photo shoot was a moment in time when I could run away, when I couldn't run away from myself, when I couldn't look away from my own reflection. Each photo editing session became time that was dedicated to learning what I look like. At age 26, I didn't really know what I looked like because I had become a decades-long expert at looking away from myself. Around the same time that I started photographing myself, I also started writing poetry that grew out of the need to unlearn fat phobia. These poems came to me in dreams. They came to me as feelings that begged for linguistic expression. My self-portraits encouraged the growth of my poems and vice versa. Just like that, my artistic practice transformed into a healing practice. At the time, I was a 40th Street artist in residence, and I used the opportunity to share Mirror Talk for the first time. I hung up the photos and poems together and read my poetry during the opening event. I'm going to show you all some pictures so that you can see. So let me share the screen again. So just to give you a little overview, like I said already, I hung up the photos and the poems side by side, and I did think a lot into, or put a lot of thought into how I would break up the poems, and I paired the photos based on what I was wearing and just the quality of the images. And then, as you can see in this picture, I also incorporated an altar because altars are a part of my life, and they're a source of grounding for me. So I wanted healing to be a part of this space, and so that was one way in which I could achieve that. So sharing that work for the first time was an extremely emotional and affirming experience, which refueled my courage to continue building on this work in the form of art, in the form of conversations, and raising awareness about fat phobia, in the form of self-healing, etc. In her iconic TED Talk titled The Power of Vulnerability, Brené Brown declares that courage can be defined as a person's ability to tell their story with their whole heart. And in the spirit of these words, my artistic practice is dedicated to telling my story with my whole heart. Mirror Talk is still a work in progress. A lot of the self-portraits I shared today, I took this year, as I mentioned during the presentation. And as you can see, the work is changing and growing. Earlier this year, I had the opportunity to take a portrait photo class at Fleischer, and I can honestly share that the self-portrait assignment was my favorite. That experience encouraged me to explore self-portraiture outside of a controlled photography studio setting and to document myself as I engage with my own self in different environments. Last year, I also had the opportunity to complete a 3-month fellowship at Dieudonné, a papermaking studio in New York City. As a part of the fellowship, I created a body of pulp paintings that grew out of the work I started with Mirror Talk. I don't want to get into the nitty-gritty of papermaking because I can talk about process forever, so I'll just show you some examples. And I encourage you to notice with the last set of photos that I presented earlier, how the work I created at Dieudonné last summer is now influencing my self-portraits. So allow me to share my screen again. Oh, that's one of me at the, forgot to show that one. That's one of me at the opening reception of Mirror Talk that I presented at the 40th Street Artist in Residence Gallery. So this is a picture of me at Dieudonné. So a part of that fellowship, as I might have already said, is to create a body of work, with handmade paper being, the leading component, and of course, like my own, bringing in my own concept and using paper to talk about what I've already been making about and whatnot. So for a lot of the summer, I kind of agonized about how I would translate, my poems and my photos into paper making, and ultimately came up with this. I think I missed one. So just to offer you an up close picture of one of the pole paintings that I created. As you can see, like I'm thinking a lot about texture and the textures that we find both on the human body and in landscape, in the environment out in the world. And I had the opportunity to exhibit this work at Brick Gallery in Brooklyn. And again, always bringing in that alter component. As I said before, it's a practice that I have in my own personal life. And so I bring that to my artwork as well. And so, yeah, like I said, notice how this practice or, this body of work has now in turn influenced my self-portraits and everything that I've made since. It's important for me to share that I too am a work in progress. Today, I was able to speak about this body of work in a way I couldn't during the opening reception of Mirror Talk last year. And so it's exciting to see that personal growth and to be able to share that with you all. To put this into perspective, the work started the summer of 2018, as I already said, and it took 2 whole years of working on Mirror Talk before I could even write this artist talk. In the past 2 years, I've come to accept the fact that this is going to be a lifelong body of artwork and of healing as well. So before I open up the space to questions and conversation, because that is also an important part of this event, I just wanted to, end on this note. So to the folks who, like me, just started on their own healing journeys and are already feeling weary, I see you. To the folks who inspired me to embark on this journey, I thank you for leading the way. And to the folks who are still on their way to starting this journey, I am here for you. So do not hesitate to reach out. And with that, I invite you all to take another breath, because I just put a lot of information out there. And if anybody has questions, I'm open to answering questions. And also, like, I'm here for the conversation as well. So feel like you can jump in. I'm gonna check the chat box, see what's going on there. Oh, I see we have some Maxi fans. I'm also a fan of Maximiliano the cat, y'all.
I have a question.
Yes.
So you mentioned that this is very much a work in progress that has been unfolding over the past 2 years. And we've seen with like the photos and slides that you've shown how it's evolved across mediums. And seeing as this is a lifelong project, I was just curious if you could share with us, if you've thought that far ahead, like where you kind of see this going next or taking you next.
Yeah, and that's a great question. So thank you. I do. I have more. So I have like a series of photo shoots in my head that I will get to hopefully at some point. And then actually while so and writing poetry is always going to be a part of my practice just because um and you know this about me, but you know, just to share with everybody else, like I studied romance languages and linguistics in college, and so language is important to me as well, and so writing the poetry is always going to be important. But I, you know, one thing that I've been having a lot of dreams about or thinking about a lot is making that movement even more prominent. And so I've been kind of like having visions in like film, you know, and video, and I have that curiosity to like learn that, and so how I represent that might change, you know, how I, so it might not just be like projected video, right, or whatnot, but I think a lot of this work begs for me to show um, like more tenderness and like more intimacy, and and you know, the way that I see it in my head is through like movement and motion, and representing that motion and representing touch with myself, and learning my own self. And so um, we'll see how that continues to evolve. But you know, I have the heart of an installation artist, as you know, was probably evident, like because I incorporate that into everything I do. And so whatever, however I like move forward with those ideas, like be rest assured that it's gonna involve paper making in some way. It's gonna involve it's gonna involve all the things, and I increasingly feel all of those things coming together. So I hope that
Thank
answers
you.
the question.
Oh my God.
Good.
Thank you so much for answering that question. This is so amazing. Thank you so much for hosting us. I have a question about the interactive component to Mirror Talk. I know that when you did the initial like self-portrait installation over in Philly, there was this whole entire component of like writing yourself a letter and you know being sincere about where you need to heal and what is it that you need to touch to be able to like see yourself and accept yourself and also just as a result blossom, right? um I guess like this is a continuation of Kristen's question, is like how do you see the interactive component changing as your medium changes?
Yeah, that's a question, honestly, that I've been thinking a lot about too. And I say this because I increasingly have questions about my role as an artist and my
Mm.
role in art institutions, and my role, like, and I have questions about how my work is presented and who has access and who doesn't. And that's like a whole other can of worms.
Right.
Um, and so the reason why I have those questions is because it feels like it limits that interaction component that I've been trying to bring to my work and to bring to the folks that I want to experience my work, you know?
Right.
Um, and so as the work evolves, I honestly am not sure. I'm not
Yeah.
sure. I have questions even about wanting, you know, oftentimes have questions even about wanting to exhibit in galleries, but like
Yeah.
being okay with the work being, you know, out in the world,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
or and I've been actually, so another thing that I was dreaming a lot about while I was home is during the quarantine is, you know, dreaming about like interactive street art, because even that feels like it's not very interactive. And
Mhm.
so, you know, how do you invite people to engage with it and not just feel like, I mean, people, and some people do, right? Like when people graffiti on it, or when they, you know, they engage with it. So, but I've
Mhm.
been thinking on another scale how like we can be as artists more intentional about that. So a lot of floating I think that just led to more questions. But
Yeah.
but I think for now, you know, and where and with the direction in which I see this work going, I'm still not sure.
Yeah. Before, like, I know that there are surely like so many more questions. I actually, just a very quick follow-up question, right? I'm really grateful that you brought up like interactive street art, because in light of you being like, I don't know how I feel about these institutions and these galleries and access and all that, I was gonna ask you like, how do you feel about like taking your art to the streets? And so I think like a follow-up question for me is like, could you see yourself, again, keeping in mind that like installation artist like drive within you, could you see it being like almost like a theatrical piece? Like, could you see it being like something that merges various forms of art, like whether it's theater arts or
Yeah.
musicians or whatever, to like incorporate this level of like you have, it requires your presence. Like once you're listening to music, once you're hearing someone speak, like it requires for you to like take notes, or like at least know, right, that it's happening, right? So yeah, that was my follow-up question. I promise, like I will open up the space so other people have the mic.
Listen, you could feel free to ask questions, and I really appreciate that one. And you know, I do I perceive my work to be performative, you know, to be a performance. You know, it's a performance that I document and share with the world in one way or the other, because um it might not be like, I might not be out like, you know, in a gallery like pulling a Marina Abramovic, you know, like
Yeah.
and it, performing in a gallery setting, but I do have to step into that performance, and I have to step into that moment,
Mhm.
and I have to allow for vulnerability, and I have to allow for
Yeah.
emotion, and like
Right.
and so if I'm like constantly in and out of that space, then it doesn't,
Yeah.
it's not genuine, you know what I'm saying? So
Right.
um
No.
so but yes, like, you know,
Yeah.
I've often like wondered. So I last year when I was doing my the trauma informed training program for teaching artists, is such a long title. We had Josh Robinson, who is a drummer in Philly, and he's very well known in Philly, come in and do like a lesson, and you know, just like being inspired by that, and like, you know, whenever I work, I mean, I'm constantly listening to music, and like, you know,
Yeah.
I hear beats even if I'm not like listening to anything. I'm always like playing something because it's very grounding for me. And so
Right.
um you know, I've thought about, definitely thought about like what it would look like if I were to, you know, collaborate with a musician, and like
Yeah.
kind of bring those two things together. And then that's the other thing, like I want to also open this practice up to like collaboration with people outside of myself. I mean, I think it's
Yeah.
great that I can be a one person show. So
Yeah.
cool, you know, but
Yeah.
I definitely also want to, I do want to get to a place where I can invite people to collaborate.
Right.
And maybe even like get to a place when I can, where I can invite, you know, an audience to collaborate. But yeah, that's like, I mean, definitely always thinking about these things.
Yeah.
And ideally in a post COVID, right, like society,
Yeah.
like that is going to be possible. So
Right. I hear you. I'm honestly, and again, like I'll pass off, but I think that's so exciting, the audience participation bit. And I think it's such a like, it of course like requires a certain like emotional like stability component to like be able to invite others into that and have it be like a thing. But I I speak from seeing you and seeing your artistry evolve. Like I really do think that um I think a natural progression of your work does involve like community and does involve like bringing folks in. So I'm really excited to see like whenever that will happen. But to me, like again, having seen part of your journey, I just see it as being like a very natural progression. So
yeah.
here's to you. Here's to your artwork. Thank you so much for sharing with us. And I yield the floor.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Also, if folks want to send questions in the chat box, I'm happy to check that as well and to answer, or if folks want to jump in with, any thoughts or any observations that you might have made, or wanted to share any personal experiences. I mean, things that, obviously are relevant to the conversation. Like, I am happy to open up the floor to that as well. So I'm gonna read, and it's from Glorious. Hey, Glorious. And hey, Candy, this is amazing. The work you are doing is urgently necessary. Thank you for sharing it and opening up to us about your creative process. Earlier, you said that in the past, you used smiling as a defense mechanism while taking pictures. What does it mean for a smile to be an act of defense or to use smiling as a shield? I'm asking because so often smiling is considered a welcoming gesture or a signal of vulnerability, and the absence of it, especially in art, sometimes suggests social reservation. That's such a great point, Gloria. So I thank you for that. And so, one thing that I thought of, that I, think about when I think about me smiling is that I grew up and I was raised by a very strong, woman, and a, whole group of women who smiled, and made things okay, like, and a smile would make things okay, or, you just keep moving, you keep pushing. And I grew up, thinking that vulnerability was weakness, and to show up with my full self and my range of emotions, I always thought, or thought that would be threatening, and smiling, ironically, was a way to make myself small and to make those, like, very real feelings small, because, when I was growing up, like, I was very angry and I was very upset all the time. And then the other thing is that, people would tell me, like, you have such a beautiful smile. And so when I smiled, like, I would latch on to those affirmations and those forms of validation. And because I felt like that was the only way that, people would find me attractive or would gravitate towards me. And so I think, and everybody has a very different relationship with smiling, because, if you're a femme, and you get catcalled, oftentimes it's you smile, or why aren't you smiling? And so we are made to feel bad when we come with, like, our very real set of emotions. And so, because I knew that for me, like, smile, and for some people it's not the case, right? For some people, like, smiling is hard. And for some people, smiling in pictures is like they don't want to show their teeth, so for, in my case, like, I realized that people always, like, perceive me as friendly and bubbly and, blah blah blah, and I didn't want to show that side, like, it was for me more vulnerable to yeah, just come, hold on, to show that sadness, or to show, yeah, it was just more vulnerable for me. And so I wanted to challenge myself to not just resort to that comfort zone that I had for myself.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm supposed to be talking back. I'm sorry.
Please talk back. Please talk back.
This is making me think of something a friend had told me, or something. Sorry, one of my friends had, like, this really bad argument with another friend, and she would say, "I know you're angry. I know you're angry," and he was like, "I'm not angry," but he was obviously angry, right? He was obviously angry, and one of the conversations we had was him saying that he was frustrated because he always feels like he's putting on, he's taking up this posture to protect other people, and so he makes it seem like he's happy or that like there's nothing wrong, but really he does that to protect them or to like avoid being trivialized.
Yeah.
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 It
Yeah.
sounds like that's maybe some. I have to spend more time with your newer work, but but
and you know, we can always chat about this whenever you want.
please, 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 please. Yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's it's something that I didn't even realize I was doing it. It was like by default. You know what I'm saying? Like it was like whenever I was feeling uncomfortable or whenever I was feeling ashamed or embarrassed, like I would just smile and like, you know, hopefully that would make it all go away. Or hopefully like people won't know that I was embarrassed by whatever was said. Or hopefully people won't understand that I don't like myself. Like,
Right.
you know, and we all have different coping mechanisms that we use in different ways and different methods to hide that. And so when I discovered mine, I was like, okay, I don't always have to be the bubbly one. I don't always have to be the friendly one. I don't always have to be like the you know, the one that people feel comfortable. Like I don't there what is too much? I'm not too much, you know. And so if I come angry, like I'm angry because that's a real emotion. Or if I come, you know, like upset or crying, like, listen, I have a lot of feelings. That Scorpio rising has me crying all the time. Okay. And like for a long time, like I didn't want to show that because I wanted to be like the strong one. And like, you know what? Like being vulnerable is strong.
Also, there's just a lot of power in owning vulnerability, right? Because then people can't weaponize it against you.
Mm.
People can't say you're sensitive and think that it's going to hurt you if you're like, yeah, I am sensitive, actually.
Yeah.
Say something about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm sensitive. And you know what? Like I'm okay with it. And
right.
I'm okay with myself. And like the assessment that other people have about me, like that's not about me.
Right. Right.
Yeah. But thank you for asking that and thank you for engaging back.
Yeah, I'm really grateful for this. So thank you for holding this space.
Absolutely. I'm grateful for you.
Are you gonna do more of these, or is this the last one?
Well, I will be having another artist talk in July, and that one is like really process heavy. Like, so it's gonna be through the Women's Studio Workshop in upstate New York, and it's gonna be like nitty gritty of like paper making and like process. And so that is where I'll geek out about that.
Okay.
So I invite you to definitely check that one out too if you're curious about what the heck paper making is and pulp painting is.
Definitely.
Yeah. And then, you know, but hopefully we'll have the opportunity to like present this work in a different iteration.
Are you talking about paper making in terms of like book art?
So, you know, those pulp paintings that I showed
Mm-hmm.
that I made in New York last year, I'm going to be talking about that. So the Women's Studio
Okay.
Workshop, it's a paper making, book binding and printmaking studio in upstate. And it was actually the first studio where I took a paper making class. And so I was supposed to teach there this summer, but the Rona. And so they invited me to give a talk. And so, but that one I decided because of the you know organization that's hosting it, I thought it would be appropriate to get like really into like process. And so I still want people to show up because I feel like so many of my close ones like don't fully understand what I do when I'm making paper. But and so I definitely invite you to be a part of that too.
I will definitely show up. So thank you.
Thank you. Rashad has a question. So have you ever felt like not showing that vulnerability is also linked to racism? How do you cope with people denying your reality based on your womanness or brownness? So I really appreciate that question because, well, first I'll start by saying like, I identify as genderqueer, but I also heavily feel connected to womanhood and particularly Mexican womanhood. And that's something that I'm learning about myself all the time. And so, yeah, that is still very relevant. Like, absolutely, like, you know, when you were raised in a, with a lot of like, particularly immigrant, particularly because they're undocumented and Mexican, you know, brown women, like it's, that not showing that vulnerability is you're like almost a key to survival. Like I think a lot about how I have the privilege to show vulnerability because, you know, the people who came before me, you know, made that space for me. Like they lent me that privilege. Like I get to do this healing work now. I get to learn about myself in this way. I get to make art with the support of, you know, a group of people who had to tone down their own vulnerability and in order to survive. And I mean that quite literally. I mean that quite literally, right? Like I mean like um to be able to feed their families, to be able to go unnoticed in a country that is like just waiting to get immigrants out of here. You know what I'm saying? So I definitely, it was something that I had to learn because when we're kids, right, we're learning our behaviors from our parents and our caretakers. And so, you know, they're modeling and I'm following. But obviously now I get to unlearn that. And like I said, like I'm learning that it is a privilege. And so I do feel responsibility to like also do this work so that, and to break those patterns and cycles so that, you know, folks after me have that example and have some body modeling, you know, another way of being. And then in terms of, you know, is that linked to racism? Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And especially because in the Latinx community, and I'm going to speak directly to like non-Black Latinx folks, like we are always trying to be the model minority, right? And so part of that, you know, like making yourself small and like going unnoticed, like that is a part of that too. And so, you know, it's something that I've been learning about a lot, you know, these past couple of years as I'm doing this work, and conversations that, you know, I've been having with my family about how like oftentimes like, you know, turning down that vulnerability and turning down like our very real anger and our very real whatever experiences like is a part of that. So thank you. Tammy, hi Candy, thank you for this. Could you share more about the process of embracing your body despite all the messages society feeds about image and finding the courage to go against it? That is a great question. So thank you. And so I'm just gonna cool. So that is a super great question. And it's not easy, right? Because it's like you're trying to learn something that you know, where the monster is still working and is still actively like, you know, trying to make you feel bad about who you are. And in many ways, like what it really has taken is for me to just recognize it for what it is. It's for me to call it out for what it is. And the other thing is therapy. Like I started talking to a therapist last year, thanks to the encouragement of like my amazing friends. And so, you know, this work is important, but I've had to come at this work, my artwork and my healing work from many directions, because I'm having to affirm myself when society won't affirm me, right? I'm having to affirm my person. I'm having to reconnect with my person at the same time, reconnect with me and discover who I am, discover, you know, and get in touch with the things that I felt like I lost, right? Like, or that I haven't experienced, like sensuality, like, you know, fat folks are often like desexualized or fetishized. Like it's one or the other, you know? And so we don't get the chance to cultivate that for ourselves. Like that is projected onto us. And so it really, you know, it's like an everyday practice. It's like, you know, waking up and like, and encouraging myself to look in the mirror and encouraging myself to like first accept what I see and then to learn to love what I see, you know? And it's a part of like, you know, challenging negative thoughts every day. It's a part of like I said, affirm myself every day, and to, of course, like have the support of friends and family, and to have the support of my therapist, which is really important. And I know that doesn't work for everybody, but it has been something that works for me. And I think another thing that works for me is that the more I understand a thing, the more comfortable I get with it, the more I can talk about it. And so understanding fat phobia as a system of oppression and the ways that it manifests, like that is important to do the healing work that I need to do outside of, you know, what society is telling me, because society didn't just decide to say that fat people are beautiful, right? Like that's not a thing still. Like fat people are affirming fat people, you know. And and so yeah, I hope that answers that question. And Evelina, thank you for being here, Evelina. I appreciate you more and more, Candy. Your braveness in sharing your journey and healing strategies is admirable, and the work that needs to take place to heal generations. You rock, my friend, affirming self and creating space for others to be validated. Validated. I love you. Thank you for that sweet note. I really appreciate that. And you know how I feel too. I love you, and I'm grateful that you are in my life. So thank you. Do we have any other questions? Zoe, feel free to jump in. Feel free to unmute yourself.
Yo,
Hey, friend.
hi Candy. It's so good to see you. I just wanted to like reiterate a little bit what everyone else was saying about thanking you for opening up the space and showing this vulnerability, especially in when it's such a challenging time for, especially for people of color in this country, to show any vulnerability whatsoever. I think is extremely brave and powerful.
Appreciate
And
that.
I love you. And I was also wondering if maybe you would speak more to, you said that you were genderqueer, and I am too, if you could speak more to the intersection of that in terms of the fat phobia experience, because it sounds like, I mean, I don't know if you experienced gender dysphoria, but it rang that bell in my mind. So I was wondering if there had been any overlay there with your gender identity and expression.
Yes, that's an amazing question. And so I thank you for that. And yes, one thing that I struggled with is that when, you know, I was younger, like there was a big push for me to dress more femme, you know, and to embrace femininity. And like there was always the assumption that being more feminine would make me more attractive, right? And sometimes I just really like didn't want to. And some days I wake up wanting to wear a dress, and some days I don't. And some days I want to wear lipstick, and some days I don't. And some days I do wear lipstick and a dress, and I don't feel the way that people are perceiving me. And so, you know, but for the longest time, it was like if my hair's long and my hair is beautiful, then, you know, that will make me more appealing. If my, you know, if I'm wearing you know, certain clothes, like that will make me more appealing. So so it did create a lot of gender dysphoria for me for that reason, because, you know, I was dressing to like project, you know, something that was more appealing and more, you know, palatable. And, you know, that's not the case anymore. Or that's something that I'm working against, and just like kind of going with, you know, being comfortable with clothes as a fat person, period, was like, it took a long time. And I don't think I felt comfortable in clothes until like a couple years ago or something like that, you know. And because, you know, finding clothes that to fit the way that I felt comfortable, like that was hard. And we haven't even had like size inclusive brands until like very recently, and still like they're very, you know, the options are very limited. So yeah,
Thank you for that. Yeah,
thank you. Love you, friend.
love you.
So I have a question from Kinkerbell. When doing work that requires such vulnerability, do you feel like you were able to make space for joy in your work? So for clarity, I don't think that they are polar opposites, but sometimes I feel societal scripts that make us feel like that is the case. Did you feel like there was any relationship between vulnerability and joy in the journey of your work? And or even vulnerability in making space for self-care? Yes. And so I have found joy. I mean, doing this work does lead to cultivating more joy, just because the freer I feel and the more, you know, the more I feel comfortable in my body, like that just makes space for joy, period. But I think, you know, the other thing is that, uh, one, I love being photographed now, and I enjoy that. And so giving other people the opportunity to photograph me and to kind of like surrender to that does bring me a lot of joy. And so I'm not behind the camera, but you know, being in that space and like being photographed by others, like, and then, you know, feeling great and like feeling in my power, like that does bring me a lot of joy. So I appreciate that question. Thank you. And then we have another question from One Ojo. Do you find that being a part of more than one marginalized minority group makes it harder to deal with a balance of when to be quiet and when to be loud? Love, 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 love your work. Thank you. Yeah, yeah. And I'm always feeling like tugged in different directions. You know, and I feel like one thing that I've been allowing myself to do is to just give different parts of me room to breathe at different times and being okay with that, you know. Like can't like tackle it all at the same time, and I'm learning to be okay with that. Like I, you know, ideally would want everything to just like be okay and to like, you know, be good, but like that's not the case. And I say all the time, like it took, you know, so like so many decades of like trauma to like get me to where I am, and like it's gonna take a long time to like process and work through it. And so but in terms of when to be quiet and when to be loud, yeah, like, you know, it depends on the room, on the time where I, you know, who's around me. Like it's definitely a work in progress. So um it really depends. So one thing that I learned, and actually I, you know, wanted to share is that um so I was Erica Hart was giving a talk at Penn, and I went, and so they had us do this activity where they put different identities around the room. So like race, you know, body, ethnicity, class, whatever, you know, around the room. And they were asking us questions and asking us to go and stand by the identity that, you know, felt most accurate. So I remember them asking the question like, um, which which of these do you feel like most prominently, you know, in your life, which affects you the most? And I had to choose like, you know, body image issues, because what I realized is like, you know, I can be in a room of people who are brown, queer, genderqueer, you know, working class, immigrant, you know, first gen, etc., you name it. And if I'm still the only fat person, like I still won't feel safe in that space, you know. And I saw so many people in that section too. And like we had that discussion where it's like, you know, you don't feel like, you know, at least my experience has been that like I can be in a room with people who I share most identities with and like most, you know, and have experiences in common and still feel like not safe. And it's odd because it's like I should, and you know, I don't. So but it's something that, you know, I'm working on, and like learning to communicate and like learning to give people the opportunity to hold space for me, which I know that's something that I haven't been the best at, and it's also a part of the process. So thank you for that question. Maria, hi Maria, ¿cómo estás? Gracias Candy por abrir tu corazón y compartir con nosotros. Eso necesitamos hablar. Gracias. So just thank you, Candy, for opening your heart and sharing with us. And this is something that we've needed to talk about. So gracias, Maria, por estar presente y por tu apoyo. So I think that's our time, but I do want to, you know, give space for one last question if anybody wants to jump in. So Rachel, hi Rachel. Candy, this is beautiful, so good. I'm realizing, yes, bubbly smiles and nervous laughter as a shield. And then oh, okay, this is another question. Okay, and then it gets you in trouble for being too friendly with those that have no boundaries. It's a lose-lose for being disempowered. My question is, how do you feel about the special aspect of paper pulp, skin texture, and processing trauma? Thanks again for the beautiful work. So it's something that I've been like thinking about, and like textures, you know, and like yeah, like loving my body as it comes, with all the bumps and with all the stretch marks and with all the things. And so when I started working with paper, I mean, last summer when I revisited paper at Dieudonné, I um, was just really aware of all the textures in the community studio because, you know, when paper pulp dries, it dries onto the surface and it creates these natural marbled textures. Um, and so it was kind of just like from admiring that I was like, how do I replicate this on paper? And how do I replicate the textures that I see on my body on paper? And how do I replicate the bodies that I see the textures that I see on my body and in nature on paper? And so, you know, paper making as itself started as a like something that like an offering, right? Um, in East Asian cultures, it was used a lot for offerings. And so I have having my own altar practice, I have a deep connection to offerings and to expressing gratitude in those ways. And so it just kind of came together, and like paper making itself, just the process lends itself to a lot of like meditation and a lot of like, like thinking, while, you know, in action and while moving your body and while the process is something that I connected with a lot. So it just kind of goes hand in hand. And and the ability to just be free onto the paper like that, that definitely has been helpful in processing, you know, my experiences. So thank you. And then last question, thank you for doing this and for sharing so much. But secondly, are you able to talk about how members of your family have responded to this work, particularly as you have been processing experiences from childhood and teenhood? So this is something that I have been talking to my family a lot, and some of them are here, you know, in the space with me. And, you know, we've been having a lot of hard conversations about you know, what my experiences were like, because yes, they were experiences in my family, but this is a societal thing. Like, this is a cultural thing. Like, fat phobia is, like I said, you know, like, it's something that we all contend with. And internalized fat phobia is something that we all contend with. And so, you know, because of the work that I'm doing, like, I have been able to develop the language to express that and like to say, like, you know, like, I don't feel like resentment. Like, I'm still learning, and like, you know, I'm grateful that I have family that is supportive and that is open to listening, even when it's really difficult to listen. And I know that's not the experience for everybody, but, you know, I feel very blessed that that so far has been the experience for me, where, you know, these are very difficult conversations. And but for me, it has really, the trick has been to really understand what my experiences are and what I'm feeling before I communicate that with other folks. And then, you know, to understand that, like, we are all to a certain extent, like, even the people who perpetuate like fat phobia, because I said it's most of us, like, you know, even those folks are victim to the same, to like what fat phobia is, you know. And so I think putting that into perspective and then coming into conversations with that perspective has made it easier. So, but thank you so much, everybody, for lending your energy, lending your time, and like being here and being open to these conversations. And know that I'm super grateful for this space, and that the conversation doesn't end here, and that yeah, I encourage you all to carry this with you. And for family and friends, like, know that you can always talk to me about this, and other folks, like, I invite you to, you know, start your own conversations with your folks. And yeah, so thank you. Gina, any last words before we all part ways?
Well, first off, thank you so much for doing this. It was really incredible, and the questions were astounding. I mean,
Amazing.
Unbelievable. How can folks find you? How can they find out like what you're selling, and, you know, where they can see more of your work and events? You mentioned an event earlier. So yeah, how can they find you and reach out if they have questions after this?
I appreciate that. So I am Most active on Instagram. I have a website, so candyalexandragonzalez.com. That's always open. I gotta say it's a work in progress, so my bad. But yeah, so my Instagram handle is Candy_Alexandra1. And you can find me there. Like, I'm not as active as I used to be, because I'm like questioning a lot why I post. And like that's a part of the healing process, and not letting that dictate what I make and how I create. That being said, I do post any updates there, and so please feel free to go there. And through my trauma awareness, my trauma competency practice, like I'm also posting a lot of like good resources for folks, given what's going on around us. And that being said, like in terms of support, like I feel very lucky that I have a lot of support from folks in my life. So if you want to give money for the work, I encourage you to donate to either the Philadelphia Community Bail Fund or to the Morris House. Please, these folks need the money. And I think the Bail Fund is actually redirecting funds. So the Morris House, please support Black trans folks and Black trans women. This is super important. So thank you, Gina, for putting that in chat box. So yes, right. Thank you all so much. And I wish you the best, sending a lot of love.
Thank you so much. People are still thanking you.
That was my sister. She's being silly.
Oh.
I know she's about to tell my dog that I showed a picture of the cat and not my dog. Thank you all.
Thank you again. Take care. Bye.